Hello everybody and most welcome to H673. We are recording here in Närke, in a little place called Sköllersta. It's a village with barely a couple of thousand inhabitants. But we are in the direct proximity to a great church, Sköllersta kyrka. We are having a cloudy day today. It's very warm and it's a bit foggy, and it seems very promising for the day to come, because we have a problem here to take up today that has been suggested by my colleague Kalle Lundahl after a couple of weeks, or well, at least a week. And I've been pondering about that, and I didn't know how to make head and tail. I will go into the explanation what brought about the solution to the problem, because that is in itself very interesting, I think. But I will start with the solution. I think that's the best part. And I call the lecture Foundational Principles of Counting. And the direct rule and the foundation I want to put down first is going from the whole to the parts. And that is something we mentioned before, but we were usually talking about space. And we have globalism as expounded by quantum mechanics, Julian Barber, and I also understood the Italian physicist Carlo Rovelli. And we have this also in what we just started with, that is called Connectivism. There we always go from the whole, from all the connections in the whole world, to the details, and we found the properties from the whole going to the parts. There's an interesting connection there. The parts and the original, that's the relationship we have here, and that one could say that's the relationship between subject and object in some ways, and also the relationship between implicit and explicit. But let's just keep in mind that there is a relationship between part or parts and the whole. And that goes in both areas. Remember that time takes its foundation from space. It's a revelation we had from Lakoff and Johnson. Time takes its foundation in space. That means that the whole we've been talking about, it's both spatial, and I pointed out this in red, it's also temporal. The wholeness is also temporal. And that means the same connectivism, the same going from the global to the little, and thereby finding the properties, the knowledge, how to understand, goes both for space and time. That means in the whole of the temporal, we have all orders, all sorts of orders, no matter what they are already in the whole. So it doesn't start with a part, a certain order, and then you sort of add up, like we do in reductionism, to get to the whole. It's the opposite. In the whole temporal, global thing, that is where all the properties are. And that is what I would say a partial take or a fixed take. That's the reflective consciousness being a bit out of sync. It is the 0.2 seconds delay of the left hemisphere. Two different ways of saying the thing. This is sort of pointing to it. So what on earth is that? Being out of sync. Well, the reflective consciousness, as we meant before, has a one could say preconceived order. It wants to have an order, but it doesn't explain why that order should be. It's not part of the proposition. It's not explained. Why do I want to have this certain order? The order is supposed to exist there. And I claim in this lecture that that could be the start of the problem. Let me give an example. What could this reflective consciousness be? I think we all noticed it. I would in a bit tell you how I noticed it in myself, but I start with a joke because that's, in this case, I think that's the best solution. It's a bit inspired by Edward de Bono. And I will ask you to ask me, when you are telling a joke, what is the most important ingredient? What is the most important thing when you are telling a joke? And I will ask Kalle here to ask me in English, what is the most important thing when you tell a joke?
So what is the most important thing?
Timing.
Timing. Okay.
This is a childish joke, but it clearly shows the point. The reflective consciousness is constantly out of sync. And this idea of a preconceived order is being out of sync. It could be before, it could be after, but it's not timed, as I call it here. That's my own expression for the day. It's not decently timed. I noticed that in myself because in this electronic cigar there is a specific timing to be done. And when I was thinking of the problem, I noticed burnt sensation. Burnt sensation means I am puffing in short time spans, out of sync. It needs to be a delay here. Not directly, because that will burn the implement. It will create a burnt taste. And I was feeling this burnt taste in my mouth, and that sort of woke me to the idea, this is about being out of sync. The reason why I was puffing out of sync was I was preoccupied by solving the problem. But the side effect here actually helped me to solve the problem. It is being out of sync. And the whole thing was created of a special instantiation. We were sitting in a house together with Professor Allan Emrén, eating this beautiful ice cream cake. And Kalle once more put the question out in the air. And both me and Allan were thinking, well, in mathematics there's no specific order. And if it had stopped there, I would never ponder the problem once more. But something good happened. Kalle showed a demonstration in his face. I don't understand what you mean. Oh, I don't agree. And I didn't really understand the expression at all, because in mathematics that wasn't even an idea. We're so accustomed to having a complete free order in mathematics. And if we have an order, we have to tell why we are using that order in order to solve the equation. And a good example that actually came up there is when you want to divide something. The thing you want to divide, for instance 10, you put on top, and you have to explain why you put the most important thing below, the divider. And it's because it's easier to do the equation. It's very hard to do it if you do the opposite. That's the reason. So I'm so used to that, so I internalize that. So I don't even think of it. And this squink in the machinery that Kalle presented, that woke me up. It's a little bit like Heidegger says, as long as things are working, we are not concerned with them. We don't notice them. And I think that started my whole thinking process. And I don't think it would have been enough with a verbal exchange on the internet or not even a phone call. You need to have the whole figure, the body of the person, to really understand here is somebody who has a different position altogether. Otherwise, it would just be a proposition, and I would take that proposition almost like coming from my own head, and that would be partly ignored. But now, thanks to this specific situation, I know I'm so used to having a complete free order of hierarchy in mathematics that I don't even notice, but we often have a hierarchy in different areas. And I had a preconceived order when it comes to this one. We sort of fixate and we get out of sync, and the time delay is 0.2 seconds when it comes to the left hemisphere. And we need to sort of open up. We can actually, before we decide what hierarchy we are going to use, which ordering we're going to use, as we say in mathematics, how we're going to order the things, whatever they are, we need to open up a bit. And this is similar to open up in space. We have this narrow conception of space that is constructed by objects, and that these objects have an independent existence. This is the same with time. I have a fixated idea in which order should come. It's a little bit like when I'm standing here in this big room, I think first should come a cat, which happens actually quite frequently. It's a red cat that pops up here. And then, oddly enough, we usually have a black cat popping up as well. I don't know what they're doing. I think they are friends and they are spending time in the barn playing around, I think. The red cat seemed to be a bit more dominant, screaming at times. Sometimes I even heard both of them screaming inside the barn. But that's their secret place. That order does not have to be that way every day, but I'm sort of expecting it. First I see the red cat, then I see the black cat. It's fine, as long as it's an outside observation. But finally that becomes fixated in me. So I start looking for the red cat. And maybe I'm missing that the black cat is already here. That is being out of sync. I'm too anxious or fixated or closed, so I see that preconceived order even before it's happened. And that is actually also, oddly enough, a good explanation what ex posteriori sometimes could be. We are too quick and I'm not talking about little quick, extremely quick, because this thinking goes on so quick we can't even feel it. Now we are talking microseconds. But this is also a very good explanation for what we were discussing the other day in the podcast. How come PBS and their space-time and knowledge series always says everything was determined from the beginning? Well, they have a preconceived order how things should go. And that perception is super quick. It goes directly. But we can think out that it exists there because it goes against what we know in quantum physics. It's not determined. The proof of John Bell, it's never been disproven. We know it's not fixated from the beginning. And still people are saying it is. And I propose that will always happen. And will always be the case that maybe even a majority would say, despite John Bell, despite Niels Bohr, despite Gödel, that everything was fixated from the beginning. And the reason being, it's a very, very quick ordering that goes so quick the person can never, ever be aware of it. It's even quicker than the cat, red cat, black cat example, because I can feel that. I can feel an attitude in my system, I want to see the red cat. That doesn't go so quick. That's probably 0.2 seconds. But this other thing is so common, it's so ingrained, it's so reflective, you could say, reflexive. It's a direct. It's almost like when you go to the doctor and you have this done and the needs go up. It goes directly. It doesn't even pass the brain, I think. That is the reason. And the person saying this is being honest. That is actually what he sees. And therefore, in these cases, when we come to quantum physics, intuitions are no good. That will work in other cases, but in this case, it's no good. We need to trust John Bell. It's been proven. We need to have that as a banner to follow. That is experimental and logical and mathematical proof. And even if our brains, our system thinks differently, we need to stick to that. We know it's undecided. And whatever it seems to be, we need to stick to that. Because our reaction time is way too quick here. It's way too quick. We are, in a sense, we can say, we are being deceived by reality. But to be specific, we are deceiving ourselves. But it goes so quick, we cannot know it. So the person in the PBS YouTube clip, he was honest. That's what he felt. That's what he sensed with his whole bodily system. And that's also what most of physicians today think. And here is the reason. But this subject doesn't end there. It's much more broad than even that. It actually, and this I just started to think, it actually starts with this fundamental principle that's never been spoken about. Only mentioned by Plato because he was so sharp-minded. And that is actually what I mentioned maybe 10 episodes ago. An object in space perceived by a subject. And do not forget that time is coming from space. Time is coming from space. And remember the origo, the fixated point of observance. That's the subject. And the empty space, that is the container for the object. And in order for the object to be defined, we both need an origo, a point of origin, and we need a stable empty space to tell us where the object is localized. And exactly the same thing goes for space. Oh, time, sorry. We have the same tendency for time, because me perceiving the red cat, that it should come now, and I'm almost seeing it. That's me fixating on an origo, but on a temporal scale. Yes, I know this is much harder to perceive, because this is much harder to draw. Space, obviously, is easy to draw, because this is space. This is me drawing space. How do I draw time? Well, I can't really draw time, but we have to remember that time takes its origin in space. And then this is a helping tool. It's not as clear as I write space, but it's helpful. Because you need to remember, it has to be an origo also in time. If we start with an origo in space, then we also have an origo in time. And this origo, this supposition made by the old Greek, that we need to sort of loosen up a bit. Not criticize, but loosen up. We have a need for it. It has a purpose, yes. And we are very ingrained with it. There are different reasons for it. But we need to open it up a bit, seeing it a bit more flexible. And this flexibility also have to do with being more relaxed, more balanced. Because in the end, it's a bodily attitude. The fixation is completely literal. It's in your body. And the person who says, I can't feel it. Well, the smaller fixations that you're so used to, you won't even feel. And they're actually quite small. But they're still sort of attitudes. So, I think an example could be a person that maybe been hit a lot during childhood. Approach that person and it reacts like this. That's a fixed temporal order. The other person doesn't want to hit that person, but the reaction is there because that person has been slapped over the face, maybe by an angry teacher or something like that. Something you often notice with Spanish people, Spanish-speaking people. They are very used to getting slapped. And I remember one lecture many years ago, and it came to a heated debate. I wasn't included in the debate, and one of the attenders at the lectures rose suddenly and wanted to make a point, very clear. And I saw the other subject backing off like this. He thought the finger that was pointing out something was going to be a slap. That was a reaction. It was not conscious. It was not part of the debate. But that's a fixated temporal order. Because things around us, let's call them moments, they happen. And we have a tendency to see them in a specific order. And sometimes that order is more narrow, it's more ruled by the reflective consciousness, and the reflective consciousness doesn't have so much to do with reality, the connectiveness. Like in this example, the person just wanted to point something out very clearly. He didn't want to hit him. So it was false in a way. Me being out of sync makes reality a bit false. I would say a bit, it's a level here. It's not completely false, it's not completely right, but more false. And the more I'm fixated on this temporal order, the worse it gets. Let me put another example, because this is tricky business. We had an example the other day of a poker game, and then we were actually pinpointing space. Perception of space. What are the hands of the other poker players? You have a sort of reflective consciousness expectations over the other hand, and it's a fluent scale. Some perception you need to have, but it shouldn't be too fixated, otherwise you will end up in trouble, and the other people will use that, your attitude. They would discover that you're really betting against them, and they will know that you think they have a good hand, or bluffing. They're going to use that. It's a very marvelous game actually, because it exposes many of our pre-made attitudes. And the whole game is about these pre-made attitudes. And the problem is you cannot be without them. You need to use them as well. And this is this game between implicit and explicit, but I won't go into that now. Now let's look at the temporal order in the poker game. That is also important. In what order you do your things. We have a clear order in the poker party, in the poker game. It goes clockwise. And that needs to be followed. But I've noticed, and this is more unusual, that some people do not follow the clockwise order. Well, it's made even clearer when you are playing late at night. I play socially. I no longer play, but I played socially, and that means like late nights, Friday with bachelors, or well, even fathers who escape their family for the night to have some relaxed time. And that usually includes, for some of the people, at least the ones who are willing to lose some money, beverage, shandy, a couple of beers, some wine. And what happens then is you get even more fixated. Your fixations take over because your consciousness disappears with alcohol. And I remember specifically one time, one of the participants got a marvelous hand. It was a full house, and it was 3 aces and 2 kings. Unbeatable, it's perfect. But his fixation took over. So instead of playing the game, he just says, I won, and put the cards on the table. And by doing that, he won very little. Shrapnel. What you need to do is to follow the temporal order. He didn't break any rules. Actually, he helped the others by doing it in the wrong temporal order. He showed them their hands, and nobody wanted to bet against him when we took up the hand again. And therefore, he didn't win anything to speak of. Yeah, he won the ante, but how much was that? Nothing, shrapnels. But that is out of sync. And the sync is important in poker play. It's how you move your hand with your cards as well. That's very telling. Because if you have a good hand, you have a tendency, it's almost impossible to avoid, and that you try to move the hands closer to the table. You want to show the cards. And just 1 or 2 millimeters, it's observable by the others. That needs to be in the right temporal order. When should you do it? When should you let the cards approach the table? Because that tells you have a good hand. Well, you should do it when you're not having a good hand. Lying to the others, so to speak. But it's not lying with words, it's part of the game. You approach the table with the cards, and thereby you're telling the other ones you have a good hand. they will start to perceive that there's no use betting against him. But in fact, you have a bluff on your hand. And you need to follow that temporal order or change it, depending what the other people do. I take a poker party because I think the temporal order is easier to pinpoint, but transpond that to a tennis game and it gets even more. It gets so much temporal, it gets so much about the ordering of both the players that it's even hard to talk about. The temporal order in tennis is life or death. You're both bluffing and you're both playing at the same time. You could move in one direction and sort of get the ball in the other direction. It's an ordering. And we have mentioned a very important ordering that we do not usually follow. And that's the order with our own body. And that is very hard to change. And I think we would say that here we're also talking about microseconds. But there is a specific order to our body. And that the spine should always extend before any other movement. That's the primordial bodily movement. And by not being in sync, we do not follow that. So maybe we lengthen a little bit. There's usually always a little bit of lengthening. Otherwise we can't move. But we start in the wrong order by doing something without first lengthening. And how do you do that? Well, here it's actually dead simple. You need to start with the lengthening. And how do you do that? You stop yourself from doing the other stuff. That's enough. That's more than enough. If you don't do the other stuff first, the wrong temporal order, you will lengthen. And that is something all children does, all animal does. But we human beings, thanks to the reflective consciousness is not a bad thing. I have to put that in all the time. I think one of our listeners think it's a bad thing, the reflective consciousness. It's not a bad thing, but we need to be aware of it. It is a reflective consciousness, it's automatic. We need to control it. And that reflective consciousness should not be engaged in movement because it doesn't know anything about movement. It makes a parody of movement. So stop ourselves, we call that in Alexander technique inhibiting to let the right order rule more and more and more, because that's a progressive scale. You being able to do it more and more. And I even remember we were actually recording lectures last year here in November, I think.
No, from January.
Yeah, but approximately 1 year. And I remember me standing here, and my stance in those times were much different. It was actually much more toe-oriented. I can remember the feeling standing like this. And now I'm standing more on my feet. And I have more weight on my left leg, even if it's still not 50-50. It's more on the left leg. I can feel the weight going down into my foot on my left leg as well. And that's a difference. That's more correct temporal order. Now my back is lengthening first. And then I do talking, and then I do movement, and then I move my fingers, and then I look around, whatever I do. So I gave you some examples here what this is, but give it some time because the temporal thing is much more complicated. It's harder to draw or write, but just remember this. This is very helpful. Think always temporal things take their model from space. So there are always some similarities in the imagery. And I think that's very helpful. That helped me, including this other stuff with the electronic cigar and the happenstance of Alan Imrian. Very, very important. Because I wasn't at all aware I wasn't following any order in mathematics. I am, however, following strict orders in other areas, which I'm not even vaguely aware of. I'm beginning to get a bit aware of them, but it's very, very interesting. Time actually is a new chapter to open up here, and it has some points that are very close to space, but I have some other points that are so fascinating because this is where the energy comes from in the movement. But I think that's more than plenty for today. I think we're better round up here, and I say thank you for this first one, this first take with temporal ordering and sequences. Thank you very much, and goodbye.